One of the things that has always perplexed me as a therapist is the psychology of family and relational cults. Who wants to believe that one individual with a charismatic attitude, a lot of personality, a lot of flamboyance, a lot of broken and false promises that feels normal, right? It feels believable. Who wants to believe that one person can do that to anybody, to you, to a family member? Cults are very complicated because there's a series of psychological and emotional factors that impacts the victim, the individual who can't get out of the cult mindset. Now, if we're talking about a family cult, we're talking about a situation where you've been raised, born into first, raised, and then molded over time to believe things that may or may not be true, to feel a certain way about things, to move about in the world in a certain way. An example of a family cult could really include family alliances and family coalitions and isolation of the family through what we call family community isolation. Meaning the world is out there and nobody out there should be a part of us because we are safe in here. That there is a commonality between us. There is a link that pulls us together as a family, and you're not to go outside of that, because if you go outside of that, then you are not a part of this family. That is really the cult mindset, and it's very frightening. There's commonalities with cults, commonalities that, most psychologists look for when dealing with a potential cult, whether that's a religious cult, a spiritual cult, or a family cult. Similarities include the cult being led by somebody who is charismatic, possibly physically attractive, and somebody who's encouraging and has what we call hierarchical power, meaning you're up here and everybody else is down here, right? The other commonality that we see in field psychology is most cult leaders live in the community. So they live and they function and they preach and teach, or, they behave a certain way in the community, often known for manipulating other people. They tend to be highly respected. They tend to be looked at as positive figures of society and even positive figures of a family. So if you feel like you may have experienced being a part of a cult, even if it's a religious cult or a spiritual cult, then you want to keep on watching. There are behaviors, according to the American Psychological Association, that cult leaders, even leaders within a family cult, tend to possess, or there are common behaviors that they display that can destroy not only your mind, but your heart and ultimately your soul. The American Psychological Association defines a cult as involving seclusion from the outside world. There's an isolation of the mind and beliefs and feelings and behaviors. You're not to operate outside of that, cult in the way that they do things. So there's seclusion from the outside world. There's also what we call authoritarian structures, meaning authoritarian, just think of Hitler, right? You do as I say, even if that means I have to beat you, harm you, threaten you, intimidate you, put fear in you, really make you feel like I'm above you and you're beneath me. So that authoritarian structure is present in family cults, religious cults, and spiritual cults. There's also odd and unusual beliefs in these kind of families and in cults in general. Odd and unusual beliefs may be, God wants us to drink this poison, and whoever doesn't die is highly favored, right? That's an example of an odd and unusual belief. Another thing is UFOs. There's going to be a UFO that is going to come from the sky tomorrow, and we all need to go down to the river and sit there and chant and be ready for the aliens to come and get us, There have been leaders in our history, I will post them in the description box for you, who were not a part of family cults, but they were religious and spiritual cults, and they had some very wayward mentalities. or maybe I should say mindsets. That's the word I'm looking for. They had some really interesting mindsets. And unfortunately, the power of being submissive to somebody that, seems to have the answers, seem to have been chosen to see certain things. And you may find that in these particular groups, maybe the charismatic leader does know a few things, right? Maybe they do come across as knowledgeable. Maybe they do come across as healing, a loving, caring parent. But at the end of the day, and usually at some point in your life, it becomes apparent that you've been a manipulated, triangulated person for a very long time. Not only just the seclusion from the outside world, not just the authoritarian style of teaching or raising or manipulating, but also those odd and unusual beliefs and cohesiveness and hostility, to the outside world. Again, remember, family, community, isolation. There's hostility to the outside world. They're over there, we're in here. And that's the way that it's supposed to be. There's also this wayward and dysfunctional cohesion as well. And so there's a connection between the cult leader, the cult members, right? Or the cult-like parent, and you or your siblings or children in that family. Okay, there's an odd cohesion between the two of you, and you may find yourself bringing in other people who can share that cohesiveness, right? The neighbor, an adopted child, another religious person, somebody who has been left alone and has trauma and needs to feel like they are a part of something. Let's talk just briefly about the behaviors, right? What are some of the behaviors that may be demonstrated and displayed from you if you are a part of a cult? So let's say, for example, you feel like your family is a cult. You've been in a religious cult, you've been in a spiritual cult. What are those behaviors that you are likely to display as a victim of this very, very unhealthy dynamic? Well, one is dissociation. Sometimes when you don't feel you can get out of a situation, the first thing you do is dissociate. The mind says, I can't handle this. And so it shuts down, stops communicating, or in some ways, there's a separation from reality. The other thing is cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance. I can't marry these two ideas. The idea that this person is supposedly chosen by God, the idea that this person is supposedly a parent to me, and yet harms me and abuses me and manipulates me on the other side. So what I'm going to do is drop that negative side of this situation, and I'm only going to see the good because it's so much easier. It's so much easier to see the good, right? So that's cognitive dissonance. It's kind of like this battle between good and evil. And because evil is the hard road, you decide, I'm going to take the positive road. That's the easy road. Loneliness and devotion and loyalty. You may find yourself feeling very lonely and isolated. There's devotion to the group or the family, and there's also loyalty. You may develop a certain loyalty and devotion over time that isn't healthy. It's like your devotion and loyalty to the group outweighs your own sanity, outweighs maybe the truth of what that religion tells you, right? The truth of what God tells you, the truth of what other adults tell you, the truth of what victims tell you. It becomes silent in your mind because you have decided to be devoted and loyal. There's also a lot of vulnerabilities that are shown up in people who are victims of family cults, of religious cults, spiritual cults. One vulnerability is a history of trauma. That's a really big one. A history of complex PTSD. A history of wanting to be perfect, perfectionism, being a people pleaser, and being low conflict. Those are vulnerabilities that can often get in the way of you saying that this is a very unhealthy dynamic and I need to walk away from this. So what are some signs that you should be looking for that you could be the victim, so to speak, of a religious and spiritual cult or a family cult? Well, let's start with the first thing. The first thing is any kind of leader, any kind of family member who is leading the same mindset and principles in a family or in a religious environment. The first thing that you want to ask yourself is, do I feel overly dependent on the individual? Do I feel like I can't function unless I'm functioning in some capacity with the cult, the individual, right? There is often this battle where you know you should leave, but you can't leave because of that very deep-seated devotion and loyalty that you have displayed. Cult leaders or family cult leaders, they tend to create a sense of dependency. There's also a false sense of safety, that this is the answer. This is where you're going to get help. This is the only thing that can help you. This is the only door to walk through. And of course, we have to be careful that we don't categorize everything as a cult mindset. But in those situations where you are clearly abused and manipulated, there is often the leader who is creating a false sense of hope and safety. And that's what keeps most victims bound, because they develop like this internal voice that says that if I go against the grains of what I've been told, I am likely going to be harmed, ousted, neglected, disapproved of, right? And those are the very things that human beings have trouble with in the first place. They have trouble with being what's the word I'm looking for? Neglected, bullied, harassed, ousted, right? So the cult leader, the family cult leader, the religious or spiritual cult leader, they tend to create this false sense of you're going to be accepted as long as you do what I'm telling you to do. And that is not healthy. Isolation happens, right? We just talked about that a little bit. There's also a controlling of access to the outside world and a controlling of access to information that can help deliver you important information like research articles, psychology, sociology, right? Science, religion, theology, demonology, God, the Bible. There's often this reduced exposure to information that may actually deliver you from that abusive dynamic. Why would a leader, a family cult leader, want you to read things that are outside of that unit? Why would they want you to do that? They don't, because when that happens, then you get stronger. You're building muscle, and they don't want that. They want a vulnerable individual who is unable to speak up for themselves, does not have a mind of their own, and is relying wholeheartedly on them or the dynamic. And that's a scary thing, right? There's often a pushing of the idea that you're going to be renewed, that you're going to be strengthened, that you're going to be made into an individual that society will look upon in a positive way. Again, it's mind game. There's an indoctrination, right? I see this in religious families, it's a very scary thing. It's wonderful when parents want to raise their kids to know God. It's wonderful when parents want to take their kids to church, teach them to pray, show them the Bible and explain it, the Bible is powerful, and it's not only just, a work of God that's been spiritually influenced, but it is also a very interesting piece of history. And it's wonderful when parents want to say, you know what, here you go, let's talk about it. Let's have open conversation. But what happens when indoctrination steps in? You have to read the Bible or you're going to be punished, and I'm going to tell you that you're going to be punished. We have to have Bible study or prayer, and if we don't, you're going to get a spanking, or you're going to be ousted and rejected and denied access to things. That is then becoming indoctrination. It is not encouraging in a loving way. It's now an indoctrination, right? And that's a scary thing. There may also be the attitude that, you're not allowed to go outside of that religion and learn some things about other religions. That by doing so, you are then turning your back on what's happening. And that's not okay either. That's an indoctrination. There is also a process of wearing you down. You get tired. The more they wear you down, the easier it is to manipulate you, right? And there's also love bombing, You're wonderful, you're beautiful, you're talented, you're spiritual. This is wonderful and everything is going to work out for you. And there's your husband over there and there's your wife over there. You're going to marry them. You're going to have about 10 kids. Life is going to be wonderful for you. You're wonderful, you're beautiful, you're loved, you're fearfully and wonderfully made. And the list goes on. And they just continue to blow your head up with all of these things that may or may not be true. It is not authentic. It is not showing love and encouragement. It is really trying to encourage an individual to think in a certain way so that behavior follows and things are then under the control of that family member or that cult leader. The way that you want to think of family cults or religious and spiritual cults is there is a connection between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And this is cognitive behavior therapy. There's a relationship between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. If I can get you to think a certain way, then I can get you to feel a certain way so that you then begin to behave a certain way. And so this is how cults really function. They attack your thoughts, okay? Your emotions get stirred, and then your behavior follows. And there's the relationship between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And it's a very ugly trap. Join me on Friday and Saturday of this week as I talk about some of these dynamics in my live chats. I will see you guys then. Bye-bye.